October 1941, Lyon, France. A train pulls silently into the Lyon-Perroche station. Among the passengers is Virginia Hall. Her fiery red hair, now dyed a muted brown, hides beneath the brim of her modest tweed suit. The station bustles with refugees fleeing northern France, where the Nazi grip is absolute. In Lyon, the southern free zone, their hold is weaker, but the danger is still very real. Plainclothes Gestapo agents are everywhere. Discovery means certain death. Virginia steps off the train and moves swiftly, her head low, aiming for the exit. As she passes the last train car, a tall blonde man catches her eye. Her pace quickens, but she hears footsteps behind her. She can feel his gaze on her back. Is he following her? Is he one of them? Virginia doesn't dare turn around. That would risk everything. Instead, she glances at a station window, pretending to check her reflection. But she's not looking at herself. She's looking for him. Over her shoulder, she spots him in the glass. He's gaining. Then, just as suddenly, he veers off and disappears into the crowd. Maybe he was no one. Or maybe he was a Nazi spy. For now, he's gone. Virginia slips into the busy streets, her heart steady, but her senses heightened. This scare is just one of many. To survive, she must remain alert at every moment. Failure isn't an option. Virginia isn't here for herself alone. She's here for the Allies, for a free France, and for something greater. Her mission has only just begun. Welcome to Veil, the channel uncovering the extraordinary lives of history's hidden heroes. This is the story of the spy who fooled the Nazis. Virginia was the most dangerous spy the Nazis never saw coming. With a wooden leg and unshakable courage, she outwitted Hitler's forces and became the Gestapo's most wanted. Virginia Hall's journey began far from the chaos of war. Born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1906, her life seemed destined for societal norms: marriage, children, and a quiet home. But Virginia was different. She craved freedom, adventure, and purpose. At age 18, she inscribed a Shakespeare paraphrase in her school yearbook: "I must have liberty, with all as large a charter as I please." She wanted more from life than what society prescribed. By 1939, however, Virginia found herself stuck in a frustrating job as a State Department clerk. She had dreamed of becoming a diplomat, crafting foreign policy and influencing the world. But those dreams had been denied 3 times. The first 2 rejections seemed to boil down to her gender. Despite her qualifications, fluency in 5 languages, and a deep knowledge of European politics, she was passed over. At the time, only 6 women held positions in the US diplomatic service out of 15,000 members. The third rejection was the hardest. It came after a hunting accident in 1933 that cost her a leg. Amputees, she was told, could not represent the United States abroad. Diplomats needed to be fit and strong. With her prosthetic leg, Virginia was deemed unfit. Instead of shaping world affairs, she was banished to a quiet consulate in Estonia, filing papers and answering phones. Though the work was tedious, it kept her connected to Europe, a place she loved deeply. Paris, in particular, was her haven of freedom and creativity. But as Virginia sat behind her desk, she read reports of Adolf Hitler's rise. The whispers in the halls turned to murmurs of an inevitable war. Virginia began to wonder, could this war be her chance? If this war came to pass, it could be her chance to escape the monotony of office work and finally do something meaningful. A war this big would need women as well as men. And what could be more important than standing against Hitler's oppressive politics? He sought to chain women to the home, elevate the Aryan race, and crush anyone who didn't fit his twisted vision. For Virginia, who valued freedom above all else, this was a fight she couldn't ignore. So, after 7 years of service, she resigned from the State Department. By September 1st, 1939, Germany had invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on the Nazis. By October, Virginia was packing her bags in Estonia, heading straight toward the action, her destination, Paris, the beating heart of Allied resistance and Hitler's most prized target. Women weren't allowed to serve in combat, but Virginia wasn't deterred. The French 9th Artillery Regiment was recruiting women to drive ambulances. A war on this scale required everyone to play a role, and Virginia found hers. She didn't mention the prosthetic leg hidden beneath her left pant leg, and the regiment didn't ask. If she could drive, she could help. The regiment trained her for the battlefield with an intense first aid course. Virginia learned to splint broken bones, stop bleeding, administer painkillers, and perform CPR. These skills were critical, but the real lessons would come in the field. By May 6, 1940, Virginia was stationed near Metz, on France's northeastern border. Just 4 days later, on May 10th, the Germans launched a devastating attack through Belgium, just north of her position. Virginia drove tirelessly, ferrying wounded soldiers across dangerous terrain. Sometimes, she used a proper ambulance packed with medical supplies. Inside, the air was stifling, her limbs drenched in sweat as her hands slipped on the steering wheel. The Nazis attacked from every direction, even from the air. Each time Virginia started the engine, she muttered a silent prayer that the vehicle would hold as bombs rained around her. The work was grueling, the danger constant, but she didn't stop. The intensity of the fight didn't last long. By mid-June, France's government had collapsed. Marshal Philippe Pétain, once a World War I hero, took control, but his glory days were long gone. On June 14th, the Nazis entered Paris. Pétain fled south and formed a new government, signing an armistice with Hitler on June 22nd. The agreement split France in two. The north, including Paris, came under direct Nazi occupation, while the southern half was declared a free zone under Pétain's rule. This so-called free zone, headquartered in Vichy, was nothing more than a puppet state obeying Nazi commands. Virginia's unit was demobilized. Her days driving ambulances were over. She lingered in Paris for a time, reconnecting with old friends from her student days. But it didn't take long for her to see the harsh reality. This wasn't peace, it was oppression. The Nazis were arresting and killing anyone who opposed them, from political dissenters to those they deemed socially deviant, including gay people and alcoholics. Virginia couldn't sit idly by. Her fight wasn't over. She needed to reach London, now the center of Allied resistance. The only escape route from France in 1940 was through Spain. So Virginia booked passage on a train, heading south. In Spain, she had a chance encounter with an Englishman named George Bellows. Bellows was part of the British Special Operations Executive, though he didn't reveal this as he struck up a conversation with the tall, sharp-witted American woman. At first, he was intrigued by her presence. Virginia's passion for the war effort and her courage driving ambulances during the German invasion impressed him. But what really caught his attention was her keen mind. Virginia described in meticulous detail the conditions in France. She explained the Nazi arrests in Paris and how they controlled the populace with tactics like strict curfews. She also noted how the so-called Southern Free Zone was crawling with Nazis, hiding in plain sight. As Bellows listened, he decided to take a chance on her. Before they parted, he handed her a slip of paper with a phone number. It belonged to a friend in London, Nicholas Boddington. Bellows framed it as a lighthearted suggestion, someone to call for company. But little did Virginia know, that number would lead her directly into the heart of the French resistance. January 1941, London. After some hesitation, Virginia dialed the number. On the other end, Boddington immediately invited her over for dinner. He had been waiting for her call. Like Bellows, Boddington worked for the British Special Operations Executive, or SOE, specifically its French section. Over dinner, Boddington listened more than he spoke. Virginia was captivating, sharp, eloquent, and full of determination. She spoke of her time in France and her plans to return, eager to do more. She explained how her American nationality provided an edge. Germany and Vichy France were less suspicious of Americans, as the US was still officially neutral. The Nazis would never suspect her of aiding the Allies. That one dinner convinced Boddington. Virginia had the qualities needed to work behind enemy lines. Not everyone at the SOE was convinced. Although the department prided itself on unorthodox methods, It wasn't immune to the era's pervasive sexism. Records show resistance within the agency to the idea of female agents. Some argued that women, if captured, were especially vulnerable to Nazi brutality. Others noted they lacked legal protection under the laws of war, as they weren't classified as combatants. Virginia's gender was again seen as a liability. The past 6 months had been disastrous. They hadn't managed to place a single agent in France. Their mission was to gather intelligence, sabotage Nazi operations, and organize resistance movements. To succeed, they needed skilled operatives, and Virginia was one of their best options. When they offered her a job, she accepted without hesitation. This was nothing like clerking. It was high stakes, meaningful work that could change the course of the war. Training began in April 1941. Virginia learned to pick locks, encrypt messages, and handle a variety of weapons. She practiced spotting and evading surveillance, but her role as a liaison officer was new territory even for the SOE. She would be coordinating efforts between SOE agents and French resistance leaders, a job with no blueprint. She'd have to figure it out on the ground. September 3rd, 1941. Vichy, France. Virginia arrived in the Southern Free Zone as an SOE liaison officer, freshly trained and ready for action. Her mission was to gather intelligence on Nazi activity and the state of France under Pétain's puppet government. Vichy, the regime's capital, was hostile to Britain and complicit with the Nazis, making it an ideal base for Virginia's work. Her cover, a journalist for the New York Post. The role allowed her to ask pointed questions without raising suspicion and provided a channel to send intelligence back to SOE headquarters in London. Her articles would serve two purposes. The Post would publish harmless reports, details like daily ration amounts or cafe liquor rules, while the SOE would receive coded information on sensitive topics, such as Nazi supply lines and troop movements. Virginia wasted no time. Within 24 hours of arriving, she was filing reports and establishing contacts in Lyon, 100 miles from Vichy. Virginia had always been adept at forming connections, particularly with men. Back in high school, she'd been nicknamed Donna Juanita, a nod to her charm. Even now, her prosthetic leg didn't hinder her confidence or charisma. She quickly befriended key figures, including Robert Scow, the defense attaché at the American Embassy, and members of the Vichy police force. But her most significant ally was not a man. Suzanne Bertillon, Vichy's chief censor of the foreign press, reviewed all articles written by international correspondents, including Virginia's. Officially, Bertillon was loyal to Pétain's government. Unofficially, she was a passionate supporter of Charles de Gaulle and the Free French movement. Virginia sensed a kindred spirit in Bertillon's steely demeanor, but she knew charm wouldn't be enough to win her over. This relationship required trust and friendship. As the only two women in the press corps, Virginia and Bertillon formed a bond. Slowly, Bertillon began to reveal her true sympathies. She despised Pétain's collaboration with the Nazis and wanted to fight back. Virginia gave her the opportunity she'd been waiting for. Bertillon reviewed her contacts across France and compiled a list of 90 names: mayors, farmers, industrialists, all loyal to the Free French cause. These individuals had valuable intelligence, the locations of Nazi ammunition depots, troop movements, and even the construction of a submarine base in Marseille. Bertillon introduced Virginia to all of them. Suddenly, Virginia had a network of 90 dedicated informants providing the logistical intelligence the Allies desperately needed. She encrypted the information and sent it back to London. Within weeks of her arrival, Virginia had transformed their understanding of Nazi activities in France. She mapped out how the enemy maintained its supply lines, where their troops were concentrated, and even some of their strategic projects. It was the kind of insight that could turn the tide of war. This success was thanks to Virginia's sharp instincts, quick thinking, and steady composure under pressure. Her ability to gain trust, whether from men or women, quickly became one of the SOE's most valuable assets. They had taken a chance on her, and it was paying off. But danger loomed everywhere in Vichy. Gestapo agents prowled the streets. even though the city was ostensibly the seat of a free zone. Virginia couldn't ignore the risks. Vichy was a small town. She was the only female member of the press corps. Her bright red hair and slight limp made her easily recognizable, and her knack for uncovering information drew attention. Her warmth and charm made her unforgettable, a double-edged sword in enemy territory. Virginia often felt eyes on her. To prepare for the worst, she carried lethal tablets in her pockets, tiny rubber capsules filled with potassium cyanide. Swallowed whole, they were harmless. Crushed, they became deadly. SOE agents used them for silent assassinations, or, if captured, a swift end to avoid betraying their comrades under torture. She also relied on benzodrine to keep agents alert during grueling missions. For Virginia, vigilance wasn't just a habit, it was a survival skill. Never let your guard down, not for a minute. It wasn't just the Nazis keeping tabs on Virginia. The American ambassador, Fleet Admiral William Leahy, had noticed the girl reporter who spent so much time whispering to his staff. Leahy, focused on maintaining cordial relations with the Vichy government, found her suspicious. The US was trying to support Vichy in the hopes of creating a truly independent free zone, an effort that, in hindsight, would fail. But in 1941, Leahy believed the strategy might work, and Virginia's activities threatened to jeopardize it. Virginia turned on her charm whenever she encountered Leahy, appealing to their shared nationality and flattering his ego. But he remained wary, and his cool demeanor made the Gestapo's watchful eyes feel even more oppressive. The cyanide tablets in her pockets felt heavier with each passing day. Virginia also realized that Vichy's cult of personality around Marshal Pétain made it a challenging place to recruit. The town was steeped in loyalty to Pétain's regime, leaving little room for dissent. After a month, she knew she needed to move. October 1941, Virginia left Vichy for Lyon, a larger, more rebellious city in east-central France. Her goal was to build a resistance network from the anger simmering in its streets. Lyon's geography was ideal for clandestine work. Its twisting streets, 2 rivers, and 17 bridges created countless escape routes. Its proximity to the neutral Swiss border provided a potential channel for getting messages back to London. Without a radio operator, her articles remained her only means of communication with SOE headquarters. Unlike Vichy, Lyon's citizens were palpably angry about Pétain's collaboration with the Nazis. This discontent wasn't yet an organized resistance, but the spirit was there, waiting for someone to unify it. Virginia began her work by registering with the city police as a new resident, using her real name. Her status as a journalist offered a layer of protection, but she knew she'd need multiple identities to operate safely. She adopted the name Brigitte Lecontre, dyeing her red hair to a muted brown and dressing in nondescript tweed. Armed with forged papers from the SOE, she registered again under her alias. The police didn't question her and waved her through. Lyon was teeming with refugees from Nazi-occupied northern France. Many had fled south, hoping for safety in the free zone. But the French police, eager to please their Nazi overlords, enforced brutal crackdowns, targeting Jews, gay people, people of color, and others they deemed undesirable. For Virginia, finding a place to stay proved difficult. The city's hotels and boarding houses were overflowing. Eventually, she found refuge in the Saint Elizabeth convent on the hills overlooking Lyon. The nuns, horrified by Nazi atrocities, quickly assessed Virginia's loyalties. Once trust was established, they offered their convent as a safe house, one of the first SOE safe houses in Vichy-controlled territory. But Virginia needed more than safe houses. Her mission was to recruit brave men and women willing to risk their lives for the resistance. These recruits would collect intelligence and learn sabotage techniques, forming a shadow army to weaken the Nazis from within. To do this, Virginia moved into the heart of Lyon as soon as a room became available at the Grand Nouvelle Hotel. Using her Brigitte Lecontre identity, she checked in and began embedding herself in the city. Virginia's work required constant reinvention. She adopted multiple aliases: Brigitte, Germaine, Marie, and adjusted her appearance to fit each persona. Her newly dyed brown hair gave her a plain, unassuming look, a blank canvas she could reshape as needed. Hats, glasses, makeup, and distinctive mannerisms followed, each carefully chosen to make her unrecognizable. These subtle disguises allowed her to navigate Lyon undetected, even if the same Gestapo officer or Vichy informant saw her multiple times. She was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. Virginia's SOE codename was Marie Mona, a name that would soon strike fear and respect across occupied France. Virginia worked quickly in Lyon, just as she had in Vichy. From her hotel, she began recruiting staff, then expanded her efforts to include a local restaurateur. She had an uncanny ability to identify people's true loyalties. A veiled hint about her own allegiance, paired with her inviting conversational charm, often revealed where sympathies lay. Her American nationality proved a valuable tool. In October 1941, the US remained neutral, and Virginia seemed to exist outside the tangled web of French political loyalties. Of course, she was quietly working her way into their very center. Her first major success in Lyon came in recruiting the American vice consul, George Whittingill, codenamed Lion. Her position as a journalist granted her access to the consulate, and over time, she chipped away at Whittingill's calm, neutral facade. Eventually, he joined her fight. Whittingill's value went beyond information. He had access to the diplomatic pouch, a vital communication tool. These sealed packages, protected by diplomatic immunity, allowed consulates to send messages across borders without interference. Even the Nazis generally respected the pouch's privileges. Whittingill would place Virginia's reports into the pouch bound for Switzerland, where they were received by the American military attaché. From there, the messages were forwarded to SOE headquarters in London. This method wasn't as fast as a wireless radio, but it had one major advantage. London could now respond. Money, instructions, and encouragement flowed back to Virginia. It was exactly what she needed to expand her operation. Meanwhile, the SOE was ramping up efforts across France, deploying more agents via parachute and boat. One of these agents was set to join Virginia in Lyon as a radio operator, while others spread throughout the Free Zone to build resistance networks. Virginia's role as a liaison officer was to connect these circuits, helping them collaborate and grow. But things didn't go as planned. In October 1941, the SOE received a message from Christophe, one of only 2 radio operators in France. Christophe had been captured by the Nazis shortly after his arrival, but had miraculously escaped. He was now hiding in an SOE safe house in Marseille called Villa Dubois. Christophe called for all SOE agents in the region to meet him at the villa, a severe breach of security protocol. Virginia, trusting her instincts, declined. Most of the other agents, however, attended the meeting. These were the early days of the SOE, and many agents lacked the training and support needed for such high-stakes work. Isolated and desperate for allies, they went to Villa Dubois seeking camaraderie and guidance. Instead, they walked into a trap. The Nazis raided the villa, arresting every agent except Christophe, who once again escaped. It was the second time he had narrowly evaded capture. Christophe de Geff claimed his survival was due to luck and skill, denying accusations of betrayal. London, mired in chaos, couldn't determine the truth. This incident highlighted the paranoia that defined life as an SOE agent. Trust was scarce. Double agents infiltrated networks, working for the Nazis while posing as allies. No one could be taken at face value, and danger lurked everywhere. Virginia, now one of only 5 SOE agents in all of France, knew she had to tread carefully. There was no radio operator left in France to assist her. The Villa Dubois disaster had cost London 12 of its best agents. But Virginia wasn't one to dwell on setbacks. If she couldn't fulfill her role as a liaison officer, she would create a new role for herself. Virginia assessed her situation. She had a steady flow of intelligence from Bertillon's network, could still use her articles to communicate with London, and now had the diplomatic pouch for two-way communication. Her growing list of contacts in Lyon was eager to resist the Nazis. Her charm and ability to earn trust set her apart. While other agents had been crushed by the isolation and pressure of their roles, Virginia thrived. She was ready to build her own resistance circuit. London, devastated by the Villa Dubois losses, placed their hopes in Virginia. Despite her inexperience, despite her prosthetic leg, she was their best chance. Her new circuit, codenamed Heckler, was officially launched. Virginia's mission in Lyon was only beginning. As she transformed whispers of dissent into an organized resistance, the stakes grew higher, and the Gestapo's gaze fell ever closer. November 13, 1942, the Pyrenees. Virginia clawed her way along the icy mountain ledge, each step a battle against the howling wind. Snow reached past her knees, and her prosthetic leg rubbed raw against her skin. Blood seeped into the thick fabric of her pants. Ahead of her, the mountain guide urged her and two other fugitives forward. Behind them were the Nazis. The free zone was gone. All of France was now under Nazi control. That alone wouldn't have driven Virginia to leave, but the Nazis had her face. Posters plastered across the country declared her the enemy's most dangerous spy, with the chilling caption, "We must find and destroy her." After over a year of meticulous organizing, daring sabotage, and constant Benzedrine-fueled vigilance, it was time for Virginia to return to London to debrief. But first, she had to survive the treacherous climb through the Pyrenees. Virginia had mastered the art of invisibility. Her dyed brown hair was the foundation of her evolving disguises, but hats, glasses, makeup, and carefully crafted mannerisms completed the transformation. These changes allowed her to move through Lyon without ever being recognized twice by the same person, Gestapo or Vichy, police alike. Her SOE codename was Marie Mona, a name that would soon become infamous in occupied France. Virginia worked fast. From her hotel, she began recruiting allies, a hotel staff member here, a restaurateur there. She had a remarkable talent for uncovering people's true loyalties. A casual conversation paired with a well-placed hint about her own allegiance often revealed whether someone could be trusted. Her American nationality helped too. In October 1941, with the US still neutral, Virginia appeared to stand outside the political tensions dividing French society. Of course, this was a carefully crafted facade. Her first major success was the recruitment of George Whittingham, Lyon's American vice consul, codenamed Lyon. As a journalist, Virginia gained access to the consulate and slowly broke through Whittingham's reserved exterior. Soon, he was working for her cause. Whittingham's most valuable contribution was his access to the diplomatic pouch, a secure method of sending messages across borders, protected by international law. Messages from Virginia would travel to neutral Switzerland before reaching SOE headquarters in London. This wasn't as efficient as a wireless radio, but it allowed London to send funds, instructions, and support back to Virginia. For her burgeoning network, this was a game changer. While Virginia expanded her operation in Lyon, the SOE's broader efforts in France suffered a devastating blow. In October 1941, Christophe, one of only 2 SOE radio operators in France, called for a meeting at Villa Dubois, a safe house in Marseille. He had recently escaped Nazi capture and claimed to have critical updates for his fellow agents. The meeting was a severe breach of security protocol, and Virginia's instincts warned her to stay away. Many other agents, however, attended the gathering, desperate for camaraderie and guidance in the isolation of their work. The meeting was a trap. The Nazis raided Villa Dubois, capturing everyone except Christophe, who once again escaped. Whether his survival was due to luck, skill, or betrayal remains a mystery. London was left reeling, having lost 12 of its best agents in a single blow. Virginia was now one of only 5 SOE agents left in France. With no radio operators remaining and few circuits to coordinate, she improvised. She leveraged her existing contacts, including Suzanne Bertillon, her network of Gaullist informants, and George Whittingham's diplomatic pouch. Then she began to recruit new allies. One of her most surprising recruits was Germaine Guerin, Lyon's most successful madam. Germaine's brothel, frequented by Nazi officers, seemed an unlikely base for resistance, but her reputation for discretion and her deep network of clients made her invaluable. When Virginia first met Germaine, she was struck by the woman's elegance and control. Dressed in luxurious furs and jewels, Germaine exuded confidence. Beneath her glamorous exterior, however, was a sharp mind and an unwavering patriotism. Germaine explained that she and her workers were already quietly resisting the Nazis. They had been sheltering Jews and other fugitives in the brothel's hidden corners. Many of the women were eager to do more. Under Virginia's direction, Germaine's team began actively sabotaging the Nazis. They rifled through the pockets of sleeping clients, photographed stolen documents, and drugged drinks to extract sensitive information. The Nazis never suspected a thing. Through Germaine, Virginia also gained access to Lyon's upper echelons of society. Wealthy brothel patrons provided safe houses, supplies, and connections that extended across France. One such connection, Eugène Genet, introduced Virginia to his brother, the Lyon police chief. With his cooperation, Virginia was warned of impending raids, giving her network critical time to escape. There was only one man Virginia trusted as much as Germaine, Dr. Jean Rousset. On the surface, he was a cheerful, chubby-cheeked gynecologist who provided medical care to Lyon's sex workers, working closely with Germaine at her brothel. But his twinkling smile and warm banter concealed remarkable courage and resolve. Like Germaine, Rousset had been sheltering Jews since 1940, risking his life with every act of defiance. But he wanted to do more. He told Virginia he was willing to do whatever it took to drive the Nazis out of France. She quickly took him on as her right-hand man. Rousset's contributions were invaluable. He helped Virginia establish new contacts across Lyon and beyond. He transformed his office into a mental asylum that doubled as an SOE safe house, coordinated the escapes of Allied pilots and Jewish refugees into neutral Spain, and let Virginia use his office as her headquarters, or poste de commande. Their cover story was simple. He was her doctor, and she was visiting for treatment. But Rousset also devised a far more subversive plan. With Germaine's cooperation and Virginia's approval, he organized an operation to infect Nazi patrons at the brothel with syphilis and gonorrhea. Using his medical authority, he issued clean health certificates to infected women, allowing them to spread the diseases undetected. Once the damage was done, he discreetly treated the women so they could continue their mission. It was a ruthless strategy orchestrated by a kind-hearted man, but these were desperate times. Anything that hindered the Nazis was fair game. With Rousset and Germaine's connections, Virginia's heckler circuit began to take shape. Hatred for the Nazis ran thick in Lyon's streets, but Virginia was careful about who she recruited. Loud dissidents who carelessly voiced their anger in public coffeehouses were liabilities. Virginia knew her network's survival depended on discretion. Every recruit needed to be secretive, disciplined, and trustworthy. People like her. She found allies in unexpected places. Hairdressers helped fugitives change their appearances. Engravers forged identity papers. A laundry worker passed messages between resistance by using stockings in her window as signals, close together for an urgent message, far apart for none. Virginia even infiltrated the Sûreté, the French counterterrorism force working for the Nazis. This gave her forewarning of impending arrests, allowing her to relocate agents and resistance members to safety. Word of her growing network spread across France. Escapees and rebels knew to head to Lyon and look for Marie Mona. Virginia provided safe houses, medical care, train tickets, and contacts in the Southwest to help them cross the Pyrenees into Spain. But Virginia's rising success came at a cost. Whenever the Nazis captured a member of the resistance or a downed Allied pilot, they tortured them for information. One name surfaced repeatedly: Marie Mona. Other whispers followed. She was the lady who limps, perhaps British or Canadian, but definitely not French. Whoever she was their escape route out of France, and she was in Lyon. The Gestapo intensified their hunt. Virginia's cover as an American journalist, once a shield, became a liability after the US entered the war on December 7, 1941. The Free Zone erupted in violence as Marshal Pétain launched a crackdown on resistance efforts. SOE headquarters offered Virginia the chance to return to London. By then, she had already survived 3 months in enemy territory, far longer than most agents. But Virginia refused to leave. Her circuit was thriving, and she had an ambitious new goal: breaking the 12 SOE agents captured at Villa Dubois out of prison. The Villa Dubois disaster in October 1941 had been the SOE's greatest failure to date. If Virginia could free those 12 men, she would restore the SOE's ability to operate in France and bring experienced agents back into the field. But first, she needed them moved to a less secure location. Virginia traveled to Vichy to meet with Fleet Admiral William Leahy, the American ambassador. Leahy had always disapproved of Virginia's activities, viewing her as a spy interfering in his diplomatic territory. But now that the US was at war, the stakes had changed. On the train to Vichy, Virginia prepared her argument. When she sat across from Leahy, she abandoned her usual charm. Instead, she laid out her case plainly. The 12 men rotting in a damp fortress were British and French soldiers who had endured starvation and torture. As an ally in the fight against the Nazis, the United States had a moral obligation to help. If Leahy couldn't act, Virginia added with a veiled threat, American newspapers would undoubtedly hear of his inaction. Leahy, though annoyed by her boldness, was impressed by her conviction. The tide of public opinion in the US had turned against Vichy, and he knew Virginia was right. Reluctantly, he promised to intervene. In March 1942, Virginia's gamble paid off. All 12 prisoners were transferred to an internment camp in Moissac, a less secure facility in the Western Free Zone. The fortress they had been locked in was impenetrable, but Moissac was a different story. Virginia knew it was too risky for her or her agents to get close to the camp, but the families of the prisoners could. One of the agents, a Frenchman, had a wife named Gabby Blush. Virginia recruited her to help. Virginia prepared Gabby carefully. "Go to the bar near the camp," she instructed. "Talk to the guards. Hint at your loyalties to the Allies. Let slip that you have money. See if anyone bites." It was a dangerous gambit, as any hint of anti-Nazi sentiment could lead to Gabby's arrest or worse, but it worked. A guard approached Gabby, willing to help in exchange for money. Through Gabby and the cooperative guard, Virginia established communication with the men inside Moissac. Together, they began planning their escape, identifying what they would need: a key to unlock their door, a blind spot in the guard tower, and something to breach the barbed wire fence. Virginia orchestrated the delivery of supplies with incredible ingenuity. Gabby brought canned goods to her husband, who used the metal to fashion a key. She delivered a rug and wood under the pretense of helping the men fix up their cabin. They would use these materials to create a makeshift trestle table to push through the barbed wire. The compliant guard played his part, convincing his superiors to leave one of the towers unmanned due to supposed structural issues. Virginia even managed to smuggle a radio transmitter to the men, hidden under a priest's robes, enabling them to communicate with London from inside the camp. By July 1942, the preparations were complete, and the radio fell silent. It was time to act. On the night of July 15th, an old woman walked past the camp, trailed by 2 children. This was the signal. If it had been an old man with the children, the escape would have been called off. At 3 a.m., the guard lit his pipe on one of the watchtowers, signaling the all clear. The prisoners unlocked their door with the handmade key and sprinted through the shadows to the fence. Using the wooden trestle table, they created a crawl space between the wires, then laid the rug beneath to protect themselves from the barbs. One by one, the men wriggled through. As the last man reached the fence, a guard appeared. He froze. "Is it the English?" the guard whispered. "Yes," the escapee hissed. "Well, the guard replied. "Don't make so much noise." Then he walked away. All 12 men made it out. On the other side of the fence, Virginia's team awaited them with a carefully planned escape route. The men were smuggled to Lyon, then to Spain, and finally to London. Many of them would go on to play pivotal roles in the SOE throughout the war. Virginia had succeeded in executing one of World War II's most daring prison breaks. After Mossack, the Gestapo intensified their efforts. They were furious, arresting and torturing anyone they suspected of resistance ties. Entire circuits were being dismantled, and Virginia knew it was only a matter of time before Heckler was compromised. SOE headquarters again urged Virginia to return to London. She had already survived longer than most agents in enemy territory, but she refused to leave. Virginia stepped up her precautions. She moved frequently, saw fewer contacts, and avoided unnecessary communication with other SOE agents. But the tension was taking its toll. The constant threat, compounded by sleepless nights and reliance on Benzedrine, led to a lapse in judgment. In August 1942, Robert A. Lesch, a Catholic clergyman, arrived in Lyon, claiming to have intelligence from a Paris circuit. Virginia was wary. Lesch was overly eager to learn about her network and suspiciously silent about a recent wave of arrests in Paris. Despite her unease, she allowed him into her circuit. Lesch came with detailed maps and photographs of Nazi defenses, which Paris had supposedly vetted. But trusting him was a grave mistake. Lesch was working for the Nazis. The intelligence he provided was doctored to mislead the Allies, and he passed everything he learned about Virginia and Heckler back to the Gestapo. Meanwhile, the Allies were preparing to invade North Africa, a move that would have sweeping consequences for France. On November 8, 1942, Allied forces landed in Algiers, Oran, and Casablanca. The Nazis responded swiftly, marching south to seize full control of the Free Zone. The Vichy government collapsed, rendering Virginia's network of police and government contacts useless. Virginia knew her position in Lyon was untenable. The Gestapo was closing in, and her circuit was at risk of total destruction. She finally agreed with London. It was time to leave. Before departing, Virginia met with Germain and Dr. Rousset one last time, entrusting them with the remaining details of her ongoing prison break operations. Virginia hugged her friends, her throat tight with emotion, but she said nothing about her departure. They didn't ask. They knew better than to question what couldn't be explained. Night had fallen, and it was now or never. With only a small bag in hand, Virginia headed to the train station. She couldn't run with her prosthetic leg, but she walked as quickly as she could. The last train left at 11 p.m., and she barely made it, hauling herself onto the train just as it began to pull out. Her heart pounded, her knee throbbed, and sweat streaked through her thick makeup. But she was on board. Her destination was Perpignan, the southernmost city in France. As her train sped south, the Nazis descended on Lyon. Flyers bearing her face, accurately described by the traitor Lesch, blanketed the city. "The enemy's most dangerous spy," the caption read. "We must find and destroy her." By November 11, 1942, Virginia had reached the foothills of the Pyrenees. Passage by plane or boat was no longer an option. The only way out of France was on foot, through the treacherous mountain passes patrolled by Nazi guards. With an expensive mountain guide and 2 other escapees, Virginia began the climb. The route was brutal. Icy winds whipped across the cliffs, snowdrifts swallowed their feet, and sharp chunks of ice rained down, narrowly missing their heads. For Virginia, the journey was even more perilous. Her wooden prosthetic leg was a constant hindrance, silently and painfully reminding her of her disadvantage. Each step was agonizing. As she dragged herself up the mountainside, she thought of the friends she'd left behind, Germain, Rousset, and the many resistants whose lives were now at risk. She clenched her jaw and pressed on. She had to survive. On Friday the 13th, as Virginia climbed towards Spain, Dr. Rousset was arrested in Lyon. Thanks to Lesch, the Nazis knew her address, her face, her code names, and the identities of many in her circuit. Virginia would later learn of the devastation. By the time she reached the Spanish border, her prosthetic was crumbling, her stump was bleeding, and her fingers were blue with frostbite. She and her companions staggered into the San Juan train station, exhausted and starving. All they needed was to board the morning train to Barcelona, where the American embassy would provide safety. But fate had other plans. The Spanish Civil Guard was conducting a routine check of the station. Virginia and her companions, too weak to run, were discovered huddled in a corner. Virginia struggled to her feet, explaining in halting Spanish that they had been on a hiking trip. The guards laughed. These bedraggled figures hadn't enjoyed anything recently. That much was clear. The Civil Guard arrested them as undocumented and destitute refugees. Virginia, who had evaded the Nazis and the Gestapo, now found herself in a Spanish jail. Spain's neutrality was tenuous. If the Nazis requested her extradition, she knew she would be handed over. Virginia convinced her cellmate, a Barcelona sex worker, to deliver a coded letter to the American consulate. The consulate deciphered her message and began negotiating her release. Within a week, Virginia was free and on her way to Barcelona. Virginia returned to London a hero. She could have spent the rest of the war in the relative safety of SOE headquarters, but when she learned of the destruction of her circuit in Lyon, she couldn't stand by. Germaine and Rousset were imprisoned in concentration camps in Germany. Most of her other contacts were dead or arrested. Devastated by the loss, Virginia's resolve to continue the fight only deepened. The SOE, however, refused to send her back to France. Her face was too well known, her survival too unlikely. Maurice Buckmaster, head of the SOE's French section, wrote to her, "You are too well known in the country, and it would be wishful thinking believing you could escape. We do not want to give the Germans even half a chance by sending in anyone as remarkable as yourself." Though flattered, Virginia couldn't accept this fate. If the SOE wouldn't send her back, she would find another way. In 1943, Virginia joined the newly formed Office of Strategic Services, OSS. The OSS was thrilled to have such an experienced agent on their team. Virginia returned to the field, working as a radio operator and training guerrilla fighters. After the Allies landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, she helped the French resistance seize control of the Haute-Loire region without direct support from Allied troops. Against all odds, Virginia survived. After the war, Virginia became the first woman hired by the CIA, the successor to the OSS. She worked primarily from Washington, training future agents. Though passed over for promotions due to persistent sexism, her contributions remained undeniable. Virginia retired to a quiet life in Maryland, where she lived with her husband, an ex-OSS agent, until her death in 1980 at the age of 76. Virginia's legacy is profound. Her name appears more often in SOE records than any other agent. Almost every SOE operative in France between 1941 and 1942 benefited from her network, whether through supplies, disguises, or crucial intelligence. She shattered expectations, proving that women could be just as effective and often more so than men in espionage. By the end of the war, the SOE had sent 52 women into France, a testament to the trail Virginia blazed. Today, Virginia Hall is recognized as one of the most extraordinary spies in history. Books, documentaries, and a forthcoming film continue to celebrate her courage, ingenuity, and unyielding spirit. Virginia Hall's life was defined by one mission: the fight for freedom. She didn't seek glory, only the chance to make a difference. And in doing so, she changed the course of history. Subscribe to Veil for more hidden stories of espionage and intrigue. Don't forget to like and share.